Welcome to the EntrePastors podcast on YouTube. This is a show that helps pastors think, act, and thrive as prosperous entrepreneurs. Well, hello and welcome to the EntrePastors podcast on YouTube. My name is Jon Sanders. I am one of the co-founders of EntrePastors, and I'm so thankful that you're tuning in to this week's episode of our podcast. We're titling this one, Stepping into the Chaos, and we're going to be hearing from one of our guests by the name of Melissa Hiatt. Melissa has served for quite a few years in a pastoral role on a church staff, and she's going to share the story of how she transitioned out of that formal ministry role into business out in the marketplace as ministry and what that has looked like for her. The reason we're titling this one Stepping into the Chaos is because you're going to hear Melissa use that phrase several times in our conversation. And she goes on to explain that it's sometimes in those seasons of chaos that she has learned to see God's hand moving in her life and graduating her from a place where she was to the new place that God would have her to be. And she has learned to really embrace that chaos and lean into it, sometimes even to go as far as to create the chaos. And I can identify with so much of that. Often the growth in my life has not come in seasons of calm and comfort. The growth has come in seasons of discomfort, where things did not feel good necessarily, where things were a little bit chaotic in my life. And it's through those times of stirring within that I often find God is moving me to new and exciting levels of influence and impact and deepening my purpose as I follow him. So you guys are in for a great conversation with Melissa Hiatt as she talks to us about stepping into the chaos. Check this out. Here we go. Well, Melissa, it is my pleasure to introduce you to the EntrePastors community and welcome you to the podcast. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah. You and I met this past spring, I believe it was, maybe early spring, late spring, something like that. You were doing an event that I signed up for through the city of Sioux Falls, and I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about that here in a minute, but you were presenting kind of a workshop. And as I heard you sharing your story, I caught a little detail that once upon a time you served on a church staff. And I thought, well, look at you now out here in the marketplace doing this. You're exactly the kind of people that we highlight on our podcast. So I reached out and you were more than happy to come on and be a guest on the show. So it's great to have you. And I'm looking forward to our conversation together.
I'm glad to be here.
So why don't we start here? Tell us just a little bit about your time in, if you will, traditional pastoral ministry. What did that look like? And then we'll start kind of unpacking the work that you do now out in the marketplace.
Yeah, so I used to serve as the associate pastor at Trinity Baptist Church. My role was to oversee discipleship, community, and leadership. So yeah, that's what I did.
How many years were you in that role, and how did you get into that? Like, did you set out to do that, or did you stumble into that, or like a lot of church stories, you just volunteered too much and then found yourself on the team?
Well, it kind of goes back to when I was 12 years old. I was in the backyard. My family, we had a big old home in South Omaha. We often had different people living with us. It was a large enough home, just an old home. And so there were often lots of people around. So I was in the backyard on a swing set. I was making up praise songs. I was singing praise songs to God, just my own. In my spirit, I heard, Melissa, I have something for you. And I jumped up and ran inside and started practicing the piano to be a good pastor's wife. That's how I discerned and understood my call. And so went to college, met my husband, Tim. He was on track to go to seminary. His dad was the president of the seminary in Sioux Falls. And about 6 weeks before we got married, he said, I do not want to do seminary. So they had just started a master's in marriage and family therapy. And so I enrolled and started the master's in marriage and family therapy. I loved my degree. I loved systems thinking. I hated individual therapy and could not see myself doing that. And so I was never licensed as a marriage and family therapist, but I used family systems thinking in every role that I've had. And so ended up working at the seminary where I graduated from as their director of enrollment services. I did that for 7 years and just really felt a holy discontent is all I can describe. And so called my husband because I was actually in Omaha visiting my parents, and it was at the beginning of the year, and I was starting to read through the Bible, and I almost threw my Bible across the room. It was like got to Genesis 12, and I was like, and how is this relevant to me at all? I was feeling very just frustrated. And in the bottom of the book of the Bible, I didn't throw it. In the bottom of the Bible, it said standing on his promises. And it was Abraham and Sarah knew that they were called, but they didn't know to where. And I thought, I know I'm being called out of this role. And Tim and I had been saving to buy a van with, with no debt. And I looked at it and I thought, we have over a year's worth of mortgage here. I could quit my job for a while. So I remember calling him and saying, I think I need to quit my job. And he was like, oh, okay. And that was in January. I was the director of enrollment services. So I stayed until September. I got the new class in. So almost a good year that I knew we needed. So we just started saving and planning. And prior to that, I had been praying that God would send somebody into my office and say, would you come and work for us? And nobody did until I announced that I was leaving. And I had somebody come into my office and say, would you come and work for us? It was a small nonprofit called First Priority. They would do the See You at the Pole and
Sure.
campus ministries. And they said, would you come and work with our donors? And we're looking at like 10 hours a week. You can do most of it from home. And then they said, how much would you want to get paid? And I said, my mortgage payment. I told him what that amount was. And he said, okay. And so anyway, so transitioned out. And part of the reason too that I was discontent is I wanted to be more involved in my church, but I was a working mom. I had 2 young children. And so it's, and I love working. Honestly, I enjoy working. And so when I quit, I was able to volunteer more at the church. And so my husband and I went through a discipleship leading program called The Journey. That's by Vantage Point 3 here in Sioux Falls. And it's a wonderful process. It's a leadership development process. It's spiritual formation through the lens of leadership. Yeah. And I was asking 3 questions. Who is God? Who am I? And what does God want to do through me? And during that year of taking that class, I kept saying to my husband, I would love to work at church. I would just love it. I would love to bring some more organization, some clearer vision around mission. And so that started to bubble up in me. And then they asked, I was on leadership team and they were going to hire an associate pastor. And I told my husband, I am not going to volunteer for this call committee. And if I'm not on the call committee, then I'm going to apply for the job. And so I went to this leadership team retreat and they were putting the team together. And I was the first person that got called to be on that team. And so I thought, okay, and began to develop that position and get really excited about it and excited about who might be the next associate at our church, and was just excited for the new energy. And then so that was about 6 months of building that job description and getting that process together. And within a week, I had 5 different people say that I should apply for the position, just randomly different people. And so I ended up meeting with our pastor and saying, this is what's happening inside of me and what I feel like the Spirit's saying. But I also was really careful about spiritual abuse. This is what God's saying to me.
Yeah.
If you don't agree, you must, I just really wanted to be careful about that and say, but if you don't think this is good, you let me know. And he said, oh, I was hoping that you would apply and was going to talk to you. So anyway, that's kind of how that process went about. So Then I was their associate pastor for 7 years.
Well, we'll talk about your transition out of that. So you spent 7 years, but before we get into that next part of the story, back up just a minute. So was there kind of like a disappointment on your part, like if you had this vision early on in life, like I'm going to be a pastor's wife, we're going to be, in ministry as a couple, and then kind of right at the last minute, your husband says, I don't think that's the direction I'm going. Was there a disappointment in that, or was there kind of like a, whew, we dodged that bullet? Like, what was that like for you?
There was a little bit of disappointment, but I was brought up in a home where my dad, he was the director of the Boys and Girls Clubs in Omaha
Okay.
and just passed away. So I might get teary talking about him, but he, um, he and my mom are exceptional people. And my dad was a minister at heart, but he worked at the Boys and Girls Clubs.
Hmm.
And I grew up for a season where we had a home church. So we met at the Boys and Girls Clubs in South Omaha. My dad would usually be the one that would preach, but not always. It was a group of 50 people that would meet together. I was baptized by him in the Boys Club swimming pool. So I had this model of we are all workers for Christ. I mean, that's what we do.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if that's in the workplace or if that's in the church. So so when my husband decided not to go into ministry, it wasn't like we weren't going to be in ministry. It was
Yeah.
just that was going to look different.
Yeah. Well said. And sorry to hear about your dad, by the way. I was not aware of that, but thankful for that heritage that he instilled in you and passed on to you. And that mindset you just shared. I mean, that is so much of what we deal with here. And I think in pastoral ministry, there's something about it that just gets there. I don't know. There's some professions that get more to the core of someone's identity. Maybe there's other jobs where it's easy just to go, I just do this thing. And then it's when I leave, I don't take it with me, but that's not pastoring. For so many, pastoring is so central to our identity. It goes everywhere with us. So it gets really hard when a pastor is either forced into some kind of a transition or they recognize a desire, like where's this coming from, to do something else that's outside the four walls of a church. It's a big part of what we deal with here. It gets to that identity of who am I? What is ministry? Does it count as gospel ministry if, it's out in the marketplace and I'm being paid often a little bit better than what they pay inside the church world? So we deal with a lot of those conversations, and I appreciate you kind of tapping into that theme. It might have been then, as we fast forward the story, because of that foundation, it might have been less traumatic or less drama in your mind around that time when you saw, hey, it's a new season. It's time to step away from this role that I've been in the church world and go out into a new role and new form of ministry that just looks different. I'd love for you to share that story. What was that like? How did you know that it's time to leave church staff and go out and do something different?
Yeah. Again, there was the holy discontent. And when I started the ministry at Trinity, and Tim and I, we had gone to church there for 12 years prior to me going on staff.
Okay.
And so that was our community, our place. And but I had also seen pastors stay too long. And so I remember going in and like holding my hands open and just saying, I only want to do this as long as you want me to, Lord. And so take it away if you want to take it away, but just let me know first.
Yeah.
That was my only condition. Like, let me know it's time for me to go before you let everyone else know it's time for me to go.
Yeah.
And that last year that I was there, I had what I can only describe as a holy discontentment. The problems weren't different. My energy for the problems was different.
Hmm.
And so I began a year of discernment of just, am I supposed to stay? And there were other things happening in the church. So the pastor that had hired me left a year after I went on staff. And then I ran the church for a year by myself. But we were very connected to the seminary. So we had a lot of retired pastors and people that worked at the seminary. So I didn't have to do the preaching, but we went through Luke for a whole year, and it was one of my favorite times. And we would spread out the teaching. And then we hired an interim, and then that interim became the senior pastor. And in my denomination, they don't ordain women. So to be a woman pastor, I felt very affirmed by my church. But I felt in my denomination, I never knew who my friend was and who my foe was.
Mm.
like who thought I should be there and who thought I shouldn't, and who
Gotcha.
thought I was taking the place of a man. Um, so it was hard. That part of it was hard and wore me out. Another part of it was when they hired the pastor, they made us co-pastors, and it was really a way to honor me. I would never be able to be a senior pastor in that denomination. So when they hired this person, they made him a co-pastor, and we were supposed to function together. But that happened within a system that didn't know how to do that and had never had that modeled. So
Yeah.
the way it transpired for me was that I had a lot of responsibility and very little authority.
Mm.
And it just got tiring.
Yeah. Yeah. And fair enough. So through that, you knew it's time to move on and move into a new season.
And that was hard and scary because that was our community for by then 19 years. And so when I started to tell my husband, I don't think I can do this anymore, his first thought was, where will we go? Where will our home be? And also having a double income is nice. So, I mean, whenever I talk about vulnerability, I talk about leaving without knowing what was next. So I left my position without knowing what was next, but I also had a husband who was working full time. So it wasn't like we went to nothing, where a lot of pastors that I've seen, they are the sole breadwinner. And I think that makes it harder for them to step away.
Absolutely. You've used the term a couple times already in this conversation, and it's one I resonate with, the term holy discontent. I've often referred to those seasons in my life as like a holy restlessness. There's a restlessness. I can't explain it. The thing that I used to find great contentment or fulfillment in, all of a sudden I'm unsettled now. And I've learned over the years in my walk with the Lord to recognize God's hand in that. Instead of saying, man, what's wrong with me? Something's broken. It's okay. Maybe God's preparing me to move me on. And sometimes it's very unexplainable why I feel that way. And other times I can point to things like this is off, And so regardless of the source of that restlessness or that discontent, I think God does work through that. And he's like, okay, I've got a new chapter, a new season. And so as you stepped out of that, was the next step really clear of like, I'm going to go from this to this, or how did that next thing unfold? And then I want to get into some details of like the skill set that you used in pastoring and inside the church, if you will. What does that look like? Because I saw you doing it, and we'll talk some about that. But anyway,
The only
continue the
clarity I
story.
had was, so during that year of holy discontentment, and what I used to do in the church was I would do the journey. So I had gone through the journey, that 9-month spiritual development through the lens of leadership, and then I started to lead it. And there's a part there where we have people do a timeline of their lives. And so we give them a blank white poster board, and we give them yellow sticky notes, and they start to put every event that they can think of on their life and put it in chronological order. And then we give them pink sticky notes, and we say, okay, now write all the negative ones, rewrite that on pink. So then you have a timeline and there's pockets of pink. And then we ask them to break up their life into 4 sections. And what I was seeing as the pastor of discipleship, and my hope is to help people grow, is that it was those pink sticky notes that usually started a new chapter in somebody's life. And so I was like, man, why do we have to wait for crappy things to happen in order for people to grow? And I started to describe those pink sticky notes as chaos. They were just utter chaos in people's lives. And then I thought, what if we entered into voluntary chaos? Could we experience growth? And so for me at that point, then I was recognizing this as a moment of chaos. And what if I stepped into it rather than just had it forced on me? So,
Hey, Melissa, I'm curious as to who else was speaking into this situation for you all. I mean, I know you and your husband, and you're looking at the open doors and also just listening to the leading of the Holy Spirit. Anybody else outside of that? Anybody objectively as a coach or a mentor or a colleague or somebody else that's just speaking into that, letting you know what they see from the outside?
well, That's why I called. I was driving to work one day and drove past the hospital, and I remembered Cindy Hoy, who is the director of spiritual care at Sanford. And I just called her and said, what would I need to do to be a chaplain there? Because I felt very enmeshed in family systems terms. My work was at Trinity, my worship was at Trinity, my friends were at Trinity, I even had some family at Trinity. And so my life felt very enmeshed. And so I was looking for those outside voices, and they were hard to come by. Mm. And my husband, as much as I love him, had a vested interest in what I decided. And I think he really wanted me to stay. But I knew I was dying inside. And so I did have to call a mentor that was no longer at our church, that was outside of our church, and just have her listen to me for a little while.
Yeah. Well, that really highlights something else we talk about a lot on this show, is just the value in coaching and mentoring and seeking those objective relationships that can speak into our life. And sometimes we have to make that investment to go outside of those circles of, people that are too close to the situation or whatever. So, yeah, that's good. Mm-hmm. And so was that the next step? Then I think I remember when I met you, you were just stepping away from some time in that role at Sanford into a new season, but was that your role as chaplain at Sanford?
Yep. So when I called Cindy Hoy, she said, have you had a unit of clinical pastoral education? Because to be a chaplain, you have to have at least one unit of clinical pastoral education to work PRN. And I hadn't. And so when I decided to leave, I was looking for a clinical pastoral education, a unit, and they had them at Avera at that time. But our family was scheduled to go on vacation the same week that it was starting. And so I found a unit in Omaha, and I went to Omaha. And so for a summer, I lived in Omaha. So it was so nice to leave and to actually have a physical break from this place. Because when I resigned from Trinity, the leadership team said, they accepted my resignation, but they asked that the Hiatt family would please stay at Trinity. And so so we're still there. But I do not do any leadership within the church anymore. So
incidentally, I tried that with the church that I planted and led for 17 years, and there was no bad blood when it was my season to go. And I honestly, I think I stayed maybe a little longer than I should have for all of the reasons that pastors stay too long. And my only regret in that whole story and that whole transition was I verbalized, we're not leaving. Our family's staying here. This is our church family. And I meant all of it. But, that was back in early 2020. And it's just, I didn't know what I didn't know. It was weird. Things were kind of weird to stay in just try to attend and be and serve in a place that you had planted and led for that long. So anyway, there is that thing of leaving. When you said that, I'm like, yeah, that there's something to just having removal from that space, even if it's just for a season. But
yeah, 10-week break was really nice.
Yeah. And by the way, just for the audience, when she's saying Sanford and Avera, these are two larger hospitals that are systems that are in our community of Sioux Falls. So just bringing everyone up to speed on that. So keep going, Melissa.
Yeah. So after the 10 weeks in Omaha, I came back, and then I started a year-long residency at the VA in Sioux Falls. So I worked as a chaplain. So it was part-time learning and part-time chaplaincy. And I got a small stipend for doing that, which was really nice. When I was done then with that year, I went through a season of, there were no chaplain positions except for the PRN one that I had. And so I started applying for jobs, and I was getting zero. I had never applied for a job and not gotten one. So this was a strange season for me. And then my sister called one day and said, did you know that you can get trained in the work of Brene Brown? And I had just read her book, Daring Greatly. And I was like, what? And so I get online, and you have to be a licensed marriage and family therapist, a licensed counselor, a licensed whatever. And then it said, and I have a master's in marriage and family therapy, but I was never licensed. And then it said licensed pastor, and I am a licensed pastor. So I went ahead and I applied and then got into that. And the very next day after getting accepted and then registering, because that was a huge when you talk about vulnerability, for me, vulnerability is finances. So here for a year, we had not been a double income family. and hadn't been able to get a job, and then had to invest in this training. And so I finally did it. And I called my husband and I'm like, I finally did it. And I was kind of in tears because it scared me to death because we had never not paid off a credit card. And the very next day I got offered a job. And
Wow.
if if I had been offered that job prior to, I never would have done it because I'm so practical. I never would have asked for the time off. I would have put it off. And that was the last year that Brené's group trained people in Daring Greatly. So
for those who might not know in our community, like just give us a overview of who is Brené Brown. I know who she is. I've read several of her books, but who is she?
So Brené Brown is a professor of social work from the University of Houston. And in her PhD work, she was convinced that the irreducible need of every man, woman, and child is to feel loved and connected. So she began to study that. She did 20 years of research in that realm and started this certification process. So now she's written The Gifts of Imperfection, Daring Greatly, Rising Strong, Braving the Wilderness, and Dare to Lead is the most, well, and then Atlas of the Heart. So yeah, an author.
Yeah, she's an author and an influencer, researcher. Like before we go deeper into that, because I do definitely want to ask you some questions around that. I want to back up to the chaplain thing. So was there a season that you were working as a chaplain? I thought you were doing something in the children's hospital when I first met you.
Yep. So I actually got a job and I was working in a talent management coordinator for a healthcare industry. And then the pediatric chaplain position came open. So then I started working at Sanford as their pediatric chaplain. So I did that for a little over 7 years.
I remember there was something with the kids hospital, or the pediatric something. So I'm just assuming in that season, it's pretty obvious, but I'll ask the obvious question. Like, you're doing pastoral work with people on the worst days of their life who are scared to death, dealing with grief, anger, all the things you process with sick or dying children. Like, anything you want to comment on in terms of that season of ministry?
Yeah, it was a hard and beautiful season. I loved that chaplain position because I not only got to work with the children and families, but I really got to work with the pediatric team. And so there was caring for the pediatric team alongside the families and the children. And
which is important to note, just as a first responder, that may to the untrained, you might think the only people that really need the services of a chaplain in that setting are the families and those dealing with the sickness. But I'm glad you bring that up. It's the people who also have to deal with that grief and trauma and all the stuff they see every day. Like there's a need there as well to minister to them, an ongoing one, because the others come and go. Those people probably stay a little longer. So obviously lots of opportunity for service inside a role like that.
Yeah, lots.
Well, coming back to the Brené Brown thing, here's the part where I'll just add a few of my details and then kind of let you run with this. First of all, this is just for my own curiosity, and it has no bearing on the power or value of this conversation. Is Brené Brown a believer? Do you know, or I don't know really where she stands on that. Do you know? You probably know her better than I do.
So I think it's in Daring Greatly or The Gifts of Imperfection, she talks about how studying, the studying that she did brought her back to her faith. So she had grown up Catholic or Episcopal, something like that. And so she's back to her faith. So she's a part of the Episcopal Church.
Gotcha. And I think the reason I ask is because of this. It became apparent to me. So here I am, just so the audience kind of knows, I signed up for this thing that the title captured me. I recognize it as a Brené Brown thing. Daring Greatly, I think, was the name of the workshop, right?
Workshop.
Courageous Leadership.
It's using Brené's research, but I call it Courageous Leadership Workshop for
there
the
it is.
Falls.
So the title of that was enough to pique my interest and go, I'd sit through that, but, and then also, I'm going to get some comp time for sitting through that. And I can use that comp time to take hours off of work at other times that I need to. So very selfishly, I'm like, I'll sign up for this and see what it's all about. But when I show up and here you are leading a workshop full of a room of, firefighters and whatnot, not the normal crowd probably that willingly signs up for these types of things. But immediately I saw ministry happening, like through you. I saw, like, I could tell immediately she's one of us. She knows the Lord. Like I just could tell. And then like I say, I heard you mention that story. And I think the detail I'm trying to weave into to this interview is you're in a position where you get to bring your faith. Now, you didn't start off the thing by saying, everyone open your Bibles to such and such. Like, you weren't preachy at all. And yet I've got to believe that as you go out and do these corporate workshops and you're working with people in the professional world, you probably have lots of opportunity for ministry, Jesus conversations when people come up to you and say, can I talk to you about something? Like, you can tell any stories you want with that, but that's what I saw. So feel free to respond in any direction you want to take it.
Well, so I'd become an expert in shame. And shame is this belief that I'm not enough. I'm not good enough. I'm not loved. I don't belong. And that's the beauty of the Christian story, is that we were created for connection. When there's not connection, there's suffering. And so I just have learned in the classes that I've taught that when you're talking about shame, one of the biggest inducers of shame is religion. And so I try to be really careful around that.
Yeah.
So I know that one of the ways that it got brought up at that training was when we do values. And so I have seen people choose values like faith, but really it's not a guiding principle. It's I'm trying to be good enough. And so in that Brene Brown work, we talk about arenas, like where are the arenas where you're wanting to show up and be brave. And sometimes when people choose faith, I think it really means I'm trying to be a good Christian. Well, that's not a value that guides then, because you need a value to guide you in those areas. And so I see people put faith down a lot and have no idea what it means. And so I actually say, I'm not going to let you put family or faith down. You cannot put family down as a value. Family is an arena, and you need values to help guide you in that time. And you can't put faith down unless you know what it means. So I want you to know what it means if you put it down. And the way that I describe faith is one of my values, but faith is believing in things I cannot see. So when it doesn't go well in my arena, when I fall face down, my faith reminds me that it's not finished yet. There's more to come. I'm believing in things I cannot see. So that's one of the ways that it comes up in my workshops, is just by trying to help clarify what faith is, because I see so many people put it down as a value, but it's not a guiding value. It's a heavy cloak of trying to be good enough.
Yeah, man, that's powerful on so many levels. And again, what you're doing such a great job in your story is just highlighting once again this reality that ministry happens anywhere God's people show up, because Jesus comes with us. So we often kind of push back on the idea of like having a Christian business. It's like, it's Christian by the very standpoint that Jesus comes to work with me and serves the people that I serve, and he serves through me. And so again, I saw that in action through you. And as I'm sitting there, I don't remember how far into the 2 days we were when you shared that part of your story, that you had once upon a time been on staff at a church. But again, like we would hold what you're doing, or an example of what you're doing, up as a possibility. We try to help pastors see that the skill set you've honed over sometimes decades in pastoral ministry inside the four walls of the church, those skills are sought after, needed, valued in the marketplace. It just has to be repackaged a little. So seeing a pastor out in corporate settings doing workshops, training, speaking, working through curriculum, whatever the case may be, we hold that up as an example of like, this is something you could be doing. And if I can take this in for a quick second down the path of like the financial side of it, you don't have to share numbers or anything specific, but I've got to believe that doing a corporate workshop probably pays a little bit better than, serving on staff at a church. True, false? What say you to that in your experience?
It does pay better, but there's seasons to everything, so
right.
to be an entrepreneur takes faith, believing in things I cannot see, you know.
Yeah.
So there are some years that have been really great and some years that have been really hard.
Yeah. Well said. And I think, again, most of our audience understands the really hard part of ministry. There've been many years of living by faith, and we're not opposed to that either, by the way. Like, but it's that it can become a cliche of, oh, just trust God. It's like, well, yes, trust God, but he is also giving you skills, and you can take those out into the marketplace in addition to, what you're doing inside the church facility as well. So that's a big part of our message.
I truly believe that the Spirit teaches me, and I believe in the Holy Spirit working in the in-between. And I am not one that's good at saying no to opportunity that comes at all. And so I have overextended myself too many times. And 2023 has been a strange season because I left the hospital in February and took on a new role that's more like 20 to 30 hours a week, where the hospital role was 12 hours a week. And so now I'm the director of women's leadership programming at MB. And I get to do this stuff with women every day, which is awesome. But I'm also doing my business, which is called Levav Leadership Consulting, where I facilitate courageous cultures by paying attention to the inner life of leaders. So really what I do is I help people get emotionally healthy. And Brene is one of the things that I use to do that. But 2023, my business went flat. Like, I was to the point where I had never really advertised. Even the city of Sioux Falls came to me. I had never advertised. And this year I was so tired, like emotionally tired from the hospital and then what my dad was going through, that I was like, I need out, and I'm going to advertise. I'm going to try to do this. And my business went flat. And as compared to last year, I mean, I still have contracts, but nothing like it was. But I think I wouldn't have known how to say no. And so I reflecting back on it, I feel like the Spirit protected me in some ways. And I'm looking forward to 2024.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that transparency too, because sometimes we all need to be reminded, we being those that are starting things entrepreneurially, like, it doesn't always go how we hope it goes. And there are seasons that it's more famine than feast. And I appreciate your transparency on that, because that's where, again, quite frankly, many in our community are. They've been, from a financial standpoint, they've been overworked and underpaid for a long time. And now here's Jon and Les encouraging them, hey, let's help you start a business too, in addition to all this other crazy stuff you got going on. And there's a struggle there. It's not overnight success by any means. And so I appreciate you being honest about the fact that it's not always, gumdrops and lollipops in the entrepreneurial world. So in addition to like the workshops you do, what are some other ways that you, or products, if you will, of your business, of your own personal business? What does that look like when you're not doing Brene Brown stuff? What are some other things you offer?
Yeah. So I have done Strengths Finder. So I'm not certified with Gallup Strengths, but I went through a certification process with an organization called Leadership Vision Consulting. So I'm called a strengths communicator. So one of the things I love to do is sit down with somebody and interview them about their 5 strengths. And then I draw a picture that represents their strengths. And it's just a beautiful way. I love to do it with groups of people, like going into an organization. An organization of 10 to 12 is perfect. And then be able to go in and interview each one of those people and then come back and teach their pictures. And it just brings so much humanity to the workplace. It's beautiful. It's a way to like really recognize each person. So that's one of the things that I do. I have been studying nonviolent communication. So I've been working with organizations, and just like the Brene Brown work is great. It gives you the framework to really lean into being courageous, but the how-to is sometimes missing. And so I found the nonviolent communication is one way that I can teach the how-to and get people to be able to really have some of those hard conversations and own their part better, rather than discharging the blame onto others. And then I can craft. So just recently I had somebody call and ask me to do time management and boundaries. And I was like, well, I can do time management, but not the way you think I'm going to do time management? I'm going to teach you how to be healthy around time management. So why are you not able to say no? So the way that I teach emotional health is understanding what you're feeling, what you're thinking, and what you're doing, and how they're all three connected.
That's cool. So when you draw pictures, like, are you kind of artistic, or are these like stick figure pictures, like just very basic stuff, or is it like really detailed drawings that you do?
They're artistic, like, and
Cool.
and not in the sense that I'm all that artistic, but what I'll do is I'll find pictures from the internet and I'll layer them to get them to say what I want them to say. And
Gotcha.
then I
Okay.
choose them and draw them. So for instance, like somebody with responsibility, I always say a strength is only a strength if it's generative for you and for others. So responsibility is one of those strengths that's generative for others. People love, like organizations love people with responsibility.
Mhm.
And so sometimes I've drawn their picture like with a big trunk. Like it's a heavy trunk that they have to carry along. But I know I have a seasoned leader if they've learned how to manage their responsibility. So they might get a suitcase that they could carry with one hand. I mean, so they've learned how to manage their responsibility.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Yeah, and just again, having sat through your teaching and leadership style for 2 days, I'm like, I can see where that would totally connect, and where you'd do a great job with that. So
Yeah, John, I've got a question
go ahead,
about
Les.
that as well. So when you that Strength Finders tool that you use, did you go through a certification to where you're a go-to person for them, or did you develop your own system, or do you have something proprietary that you take and then teach somewhere? And I'm leading somewhere with this as well, Melissa. So is that in the form of the events that you do, or have you developed it into some kind of a course, or is that in the form of a book now, or what are you
I
doing
don't
with that?
I don't do a course. It's just something that I do. So like there's a organization in Sioux Falls where I've led their therapist retreat now for 6 years in a row. And so we decided to do strengths, and I utilized the emotional health component. So we talked about the strengths and about when those strengths are emotionally healthy and when they're not.
Mhm.
So it's kind of blending everything I do um, to make that unique for them. But I learned that through Leadership Vision Consulting and worked with them for 7 years while I was at Sanford, because I was working part-time there. And we would go into organizations to build strength-based teams.
I've got, I think, about two more questions for you, Melissa. One is really simple. If someone wanted to connect with you online and learn, either ask you more questions or learn more from you, what's the best way for someone to find you and connect with you?
So I'm on, I have Lavav leader. Let's see, what is just, it's easiest to do melissahiatt.com.
Okay. We'll put the links to that in the show notes for this episode when it airs. Here's my last question. Maybe we'll see. I might have a follow up, but if I were to give you just a minute to speak to to our people, those men and women that are serving in some kind, they know they're called by God to ministry. That can look and mean some different things to different people, and yet they're also out in the marketplace trying to build something there. And you had a moment just to encourage them. What would you say to encourage our audience today?
Yeah. I would encourage them by saying, make sure that you're doing your own work. So having a coach, somebody that can help you be self-aware. I've seen too many leaders that are not self-aware enough and do damage. So find some ways to be self-aware, to understand if you're emotionally healthy, and practice those skills. Take care of yourself so that you can be your best for others.
Okay, here's a follow-up. Since you went down the road of emotional health, if you had to recommend 3 to 5 of your top favorite resources that would help somebody in that arena, what are some books, podcasts, courses, whatever that you would recommend for someone to grow in their self-awareness, their emotional health?
Yep. So season 16 of Ruth Haley Barton's Strengthening the Soul of Your Leadership. She interviews the author of Managing Leadership Anxiety. His name's Stephen Cuss. So that'd be the book that I would recommend. Managing Leadership Anxiety, Yours and Theirs by Stephen Cuss. He's a pastor, but that's using Bowen family systems to really understand and have self-awareness. I would encourage you to read Susan David's Emotional Agility.
Emotional agility.
Uh,
Okay.
And then, of course, Brené's Dare to Lead.
Yeah, that's a good one. I've read that. Very good. Well, Melissa, this has been awesome. I am very grateful to you for coming on and just sharing your story and your experiences with our audience. I know it's going to add value, and continue to do well as you're serving God in the various capacities that you're serving Him and others out there. Like, I'm proud of you, proud of the work that you're doing, and grateful for your time here today.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Well, hey, thanks for watching this episode of the EntrePastors podcast. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you can be notified every time we release a new episode. If you'd like to get connected to other pastors who are learning to think, act, and thrive as prosperous entrepreneurs, then we invite you to check us out on Facebook. Just search for the EntrePastors Connect group, answer a few of our simple questions there, and we'd love to include you in the conversations. And if you're really ready to go to the next level, then we invite you to join our EntrePastors membership community. When you become a monthly subscriber, you will receive access to courses, exclusive community, and coaching that will help you along in your own EntrePastors journey. If there's anything else we can do to serve you, please visit us at EntrePastors.com, and we will do our best to serve you there. God bless everybody. See you soon.